Welcome back to Girl on the Gov, the podcast,
where we're shooting the shit with elected officials and candidates running for office to get to know the person beyond the politics.
Because politicians needed a rebrand. All right, guys, we are 2 weeks out from this election. And of course, we are experiencing technical difficulties with 14 days left to the election. But Samantha is eating mac and cheese on her couch right now because I said, hey, I got this. I will just introduce our guest so that we don't have to record a whole ass other intro, because the one we did record, which was long and full of yapping, unfortunately did not properly download. Don't you love that for us? And it's too late to record a new one, and we just simply don't have the time with 14 days left to the election. So it's just me, and lucky for you and lucky for everyone is that we actually will be having a solo episode next week where we will be yapping away on all things 7 days out from the election, what to do, what to see, what to say on GOTV weekend, and of course, what to prepare for the big election day we have ahead of us. So with that, I'm just going to get us right into our guest interview today, because we are interviewing a state representative from North Carolina. And just a disclaimer, we actually recorded this much prior to the hurricanes that happened in North Carolina, so that is why we did not talk about it. But what we do talk about is how important of a state North Carolina is, what it's like politically there, where it's going, where it can go, its potential. And it's definitely a must-watch state for these next 14 days, or when you're listening to this, 13. So really just informative episode to learn about the state that everyone has eyes on, and a state that will hopefully surprise us in a positive way in a couple weeks when we get election results. So we dive into all the things North Carolina in this episode. So I will leave it at that and introduce our guest, State Representative from North Carolina, Julie von Haefen.
You are a state representative in North Carolina. So first of all, OMG, so many things to say, so many things to ask about. But what's the tea? What's the political landscape in North Carolina? Because this is a state that we hear about constantly when it comes to the big national races and then also the state races. But it seems like no one really has a good pulse on it. So we got to ask you.
Yeah, North Carolina is always really interesting. I mean, serving in the state legislature, we had a crazy year last year where we had one of our members switch parties in the middle of the year, which just threw kind of the legislature, into chaos, at least for a little bit. And then a lot of really bad things happen as a result of that. But, nationally, it's always kind of one of those swing states that, people pay a lot of attention to. 2020 was interesting in the presidential election just because of the pandemic and everything going on. I feel like we can definitely win North Carolina for Kamala Harris this year because just things are so different, even just 4 years later. Plus, our population is just exploding right now and people are moving into the state, which always, kind of creates a lot of uncertainty, but a lot of excitement about what's ahead.
That was one of the things that I was so curious about, too, because I think about the patterns of people moving across this country. So much of the time it's Florida, Texas, and it's people that from New York, they're oh, we're over the taxes or whatever it is. And then they're moving. But with North Carolina, so much of it from my vantage point is tech and jobs. And so I think that really pulls a diverse group of people to sort of also change the electorate. And so I'm curious how you feel that's shifted things, and also too in terms of the state, where are those shifts happening?
Well, I mean, where I live in Raleigh, we're the Research Triangle area, what you might have heard about. So it's Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. So we have a lot of universities. We have a lot of tech. Apple's coming. Their new campus is going to be here in a few years. We have Google. We have all these big tech companies. We also have a lot of biopharmacy companies coming here. So it's a very educated area, especially where I live. And so that's always, interesting because it just brings a lot of people from also very educated areas across the country. I think for us, we obviously have like those urban centers like most states, we have Raleigh and Charlotte, Greensboro, different areas like that. But still about 45% of our state only 45% of our state is considered urban. So we still have to really focus on our rural areas. And really that's kind of been the primary focus of the Democratic Party in the last couple of years. I think that we got a lot of feedback, that we weren't really focusing enough on those areas, and it's been really great to see like the excitement growing in a lot of the areas that we haven't been in recently. And I think that that's going to be the big difference for this election, is that refocus on those rural areas that are still really important for our elections.
For sure. Yeah, it's such an interesting state for so many reasons. And I think also politically, there's just been more investment in the past couple of years. So excited to see how that pays off. But I want to circle back to I just need a story. And I think everyone who's listening who doesn't know like what happened with this member switching parties, can you like give the whole breakdown of like what happened? How does that happen? How is that allowed? And ultimately, like what some of those effects were in terms of legislative power.
Yeah, so this member is from the Charlotte area. She actually served in the state legislature several years ago and then had left. I think she ran for Congress or something and lost in a primary. And so she was kind of out of the legislature for a few years. And, she came back this year, and it was kind of interesting because she kind of got into the race very last minute when, the original election happened earlier in 2022. And so her reintroduction into the political sphere was kind of unexpected. And then when she joined our caucus, I've heard different things about what her expectations were. I think that, our caucus changed a lot since the last time she was in the legislature, and maybe she expected to be treated in a different way or wasn't treated how she wanted to be treated. We heard a lot of those kind of things from her when she decided to switch parties. But there's also conversation, and rumor, was this always a plan? Did she plan to switch parties in the middle of the year? Was she a plant by the Republican Party? I mean, we never really know. So I'm not sure, I don't want to justify any rumors, but, that was the talk at the time. So since she switched parties, and yes, that is allowed. I mean, you can switch parties anytime you want to, but it really was such a blow, especially to the voters in her own district. Right. I think they obviously felt very, very betrayed. She was elected in a very Democratic district, so it wasn't even a 50-50 district. And so, they felt really, really angry. They felt really betrayed. And unfortunately, her switching parties gave the Republicans a supermajority in our House. Before she switched, we were able to uphold the vetoes of our Democratic governor, which made all the difference. I mean, it really makes all the difference when you're trying to fight against really harmful pieces of legislation. And when she switched, it gave them the ability to override any veto that the governor would issue, including lots of harmful bills that were then passed, including our 12-week abortion ban, which was probably, for me, the most devastating thing that happened last year. Before she switched parties, we were going to be able to uphold any vetoes. Our governor is very pro-choice, very supportive of reproductive rights. And when she switched parties, within a few weeks, the Republicans passed within 48 hours a ban changing our abortion laws from 20 weeks to 12 weeks, which didn't just affect North Carolinians, but affected people all across the state all across the country and across the South, because North Carolina was one of the last states with access up to 20 weeks. So that's always the first thing that comes to mind. I'll just mention a couple other quick things that happen. This continuing attack on trans kids. We passed a lot of really, harmful bills hurting trans kids, and then also public education as well. So it was really, really devastating.
Totally. I mean, that was so wild. I remember when that story broke and just being like, oh my God, Christian cinema story doesn't even compare. Like, this is just like next level, especially in terms of obviously impact and effect and all of that. But also in terms of impact and effect, one of the things that we've been seeing is quite, the amount of building from the UNC Young Dems and also just the Democratic Party across North Carolina. And I'm curious what you've been seeing from young people in the state. Like, what is the sort of the political culture that you feel like is building, on the Democratic side of things?
Yeah, if you don't know, or your listeners don't know, we have the youngest state party chair in the country. She was elected, I think it's been over a year now. Anderson Clayton's her name. She's 26 years old. And she's just brought, a new energy to our state party. She is, fantastic. She has unending energy, and she's very, very enthusiastic about especially that reaching those rural voters, because she is from a rural part of our state. And she knows what it takes, to win elections. She actually worked on Kamala Harris's campaign when she ran for president. So, she's a longtime supporter of hers. I think that, having that younger state party chair has really energized, especially like our college Dem chapters, like you mentioned, our UNC Young Dems, college Dems. I've just seen this, this incredible energy around with young people in our state. It's been honestly so wonderful, because as an elected official and a politician, that is the question we get so much. How do we energize and how do we get young people to be more involved in politics? And I think that obviously the answer, at least in our state, has been to have leadership in our state party that they can look to and see that this is a young person doing some fantastic things, and it's not something to be intimidated by or scared about, or feel like this is not, part of my world. And she's really made it very easy for people to get involved and make it really fun, actually. So
Yeah, I love that. That's huge. Like you need that leadership, and especially someone who, can be representative of a range of people in the state. I think that's really awesome and exciting to see. And I'm curious also, like, what you're looking towards for this election in North Carolina down the ticket. Are there certain races where you're like either really all in on or just want people to focus on? Like, what are those for you?
yeah, we have a lot of really, really important races this year. Obviously, our entire state legislature is up for re-election, and the person I mentioned before that switched parties is running for re-election.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah, she has a great candidate running against her, Nicole Sidman. So if you're interested in helping defeat her, look up Nicole. But that we were really, really focused this year on recruiting candidates in all 120 of our House districts here in North Carolina, because unfortunately in years past, we've had a lot of districts that have gone uncontested, which, we never want to see somebody just be handed their seat, right? You always want to have somebody run against them. And so we recruited 119 candidates, almost got there to 120, but it's really exciting to see that. I mean, so obviously as a House member, I'm extremely focused on breaking the supermajority here in North Carolina. We have to do that in order to stop a lot of that really bad legislation that I mentioned before. So we only need one seat, so we need to just win one more seat and then hold all the seats that we have. So that's kind of where I'm focused. We have a really important governor's race. Roy Cooper, who was mentioned in the running for VP, is term limited out. So we have a great candidate, Josh Stein, running for governor here in our state against an extreme candidate. I mean, he is like Trump times 1,000. His name is Mark Robinson. He's our current lieutenant governor. And he has made comments I won't even repeat here, but you can Google him and just find out all these crazy things he said. So without winning the governor's office and breaking the supermajority, Democrats here are going to lose a lot of power. So those are kind of the two offices or the two races that I'm really, really focused on. I think another one that doesn't get a lot of attention, but is really, really important, is our superintendent of public instruction. We also have a really extreme Republican candidate running who is a homeschool mom, kind of the Moms for Liberty type, who's running against a really qualified gentleman from Greensboro. And with all the attacks on public education in our state, that's another race that I hope that people will focus on this year.
Yeah, I feel like you guys are
Yeah.
really dealing with some of the serious crazies, Mark Robinson being top of the ticket there. Every time I see some clip of him, I'm like, can it get weirder? Can it get more bizarre or insane? And he always seems to be like, "Oh, hold my beer." So
Yeah.
don't, It's like, oh, but don't love that for sure. So definitely lots to look at. But of course, you're running for reelection as well. So curious when you're chatting with voters, what issues they're really focused on at the state level, what is top of mind for them and even too like nationally as well. But like, what are those things that keep coming up time and time again for them?
Well, like I said, I think, I live in a suburban district with a lot of families with young children. And I think that the two issues that we've heard a lot about, not just during the election, but the last couple of years, are these attacks on public education and are continually, non-support of our teachers. We've had, our teacher pay rate is one of the worst in the country. And so we're seeing a lot of empty classrooms. We're seeing a lot of classrooms filled with unqualified teachers or substitute teachers. And I think for me, living in an area with, a lot of families, I hear that a lot, that we really have to refocus our funding and our policy work on our public education system, because without education, it's really the bedrock of everything. It's the heart of our communities. It's everything to a lot of people. And so that's something I hear a lot about. I also both work on and hear a lot about childcare. And I know that issue has really come to the focus after the pandemic. We've heard a lot, even from the federal government, about supporting childcare. And again, especially in a suburban area like mine, it's really, really important that we support that. I think also as a suburban woman, of course, I hear a lot about reproductive rights. I'm also a mom of a almost 18-year-old young lady. And I'm so concerned about her future, and making sure that we protect her rights. And so, kind of all the things that you're hearing about, in the news nationally. But I think that those issues really come home, when you're on the doors, and especially as a state legislator, I feel like people don't understand that state legislatures are really the bodies that make a lot of those decisions. And that's kind of my goal as a state legislator, is a state legislator, is to make sure that people understand that and they don't lose focus. And because a lot of our news is very focused on the federal races and the presidential race, but we have to remain focused on local races.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like this is something Maddie and I talk about all the time, is like there's this like missing piece of civic education throughout like schooling about state ledge, because you just, it doesn't get talked about until, honestly, I feel like with COVID, it exploded. And that's the essence of people realizing like, oh, the stuff that's really impacting me is in my own backyard. It's like through the state, it's not federal, and like starting to understand that. But like, I don't remember a single point in time, like throughout my education or whatever, where I learned about the state ledge. So like, it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like we also need like some sort of policy within education that's also teaching it. So that way, then everyone understands from the jump, like this is so important. And there's so many critical things that come out of it. So just like an idea to like sprinkle in there, of course. But I am so curious in terms of, education in the ears, right? You're going, door knocking, driving around, whatever, podcasts, playlists, like who are you listening to? What's on the speakers?
To be honest, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts because I want to kind of get away from politics.
I'm the same way. I'm the same way.
Yeah, I need to kind of remain, my listening has to be kind of separate from my job. But there's some great like North Carolina podcasts I just wanted to shout out. There's a great one called The Hometown Hauler. And there are these two guys from kind of a more rural area in North Carolina, and they really like make politics easy to understand. Love those guys. So I want to give them a shout out. And, there's some other really good ones, some news, like our public radio podcast, WUNC is a good one too. But for me, like my playlists tend to focus on a lot of women artists. Of course, I'm a big Taylor Swift fan, as everyone is. So I have my Taylor Swift playlist going on a lot. And then I created my own little one called like LFG 2024.
Love it.
So it has kind of all my like hype songs on there. So yeah, like I realized my son was like listening to that playlist that I made, and he's like, these are all women. I was like, there's gotta be a reason. So
totally obsessed. You need all of them, all the playlists,
yeah.
to keep you
And I'm
going,
a big
especially in a year like
Topolone
this.
fan too. I've been listening to her a lot lately. She's amazing. I
So
went to the
obsessed.
see her in concert a couple weeks ago with my younger son, and I knew nothing about her. He was supposed to go with a friend, and then she kind of backed out at the last minute. And so he's like, "Can you just go with me?" I'm like, "Okay, I don't know who this is." And I left just like a super fan. So she was
Oh my
amazing.
gosh, I'm so jealous. I want to see her live so bad. Oh, I have a question. Are you guys full-time or part-time legislature?
Well, we're technically part-time, but it's a full-time
It's a
job.
full-time
Yeah,
job.
I mean, you can make it as much of a full-time job as you want to, or you can make it as much of a part-time job, but technically we're part-time.
Hmm. When are you guys in session? Like, what do you do when you're out of session? Like, what do your day-to-days look like?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a long session in the even years, so that's kind of our budgeting years. So in 2023, we were in session from January till October. So, if you consider that part-time,
Yeah, that
crazy.
seems pretty full-time to me.
Yeah. And then in our even years, we're in what we consider a short session. So this year we were in session from like April, and then we just had a voting day last week. So North Carolina does not have dates. Like some states have dates, like they meet from this date to this date, and that's it. It's like set in law or set in their constitution. Unfortunately, our legislature is really at the whim of our leadership. It doesn't have any dates that it has to meet. And it really, really makes it difficult for people to serve, to be quite honest, because our schedule is so erratic. It's can be really long, it can be really short. We can be called in at very last minutes. It's really difficult. And for someone like me who is honestly pretty type A with my schedule, it really has been very challenging personally to kind of be at the whim of somebody else's schedule. So I'm a
Totally.
lawyer. I practiced law for about 10 years, but I have 3 kids and decided, honestly, because of childcare reasons, that I was going to
Yeah,
stay home with them for a while. Didn't want to spend my whole salary on childcare. And so I decided
it's
to
fair.
kind of step back from my career for a while. And, I did a lot of like advocacy work during that time, and which is what led me to run for office. But so now I don't have another job. I consider this my full-time job. And so I make it a full-time job. Like I do a lot. I am always looking for different things to do. And like I travel, I like to go to a lot of different meetings and conferences. And so I really put my heart and soul into this job, and I'm lucky that I can do that, but a lot of members can't. Like they have other jobs and other commitments that they have to fulfill. But like I said, I have 3 kids, which that keeps me pretty busy.
Yeah,
And
that's a full-time job in itself.
Yeah.
yeah, so
Wow. Yeah. That's another thing that comes up for us a lot too, is like figuring out like, okay, which states have full time, what that looks like, what do
Hmm.
the reforms look like too? And like, I'm curious for North Carolina, has there ever been like a move to make it technically like full time and like change like the pay scale and like make it therefore like more accessible for more people to, of course, run for office and then serve?
I think almost every year that I've been there, the Democrats have filed those types of bills to either do a study about, increasing the salary, or, something like that. Just a study. Like it doesn't have, we don't
Yeah.
have to pass it right away, but let's just get some ideas of like what's a different way we can do this. And unfortunately, none of those bills has ever passed, or I don't even think any of them have ever been heard in a committee. I'm hoping that, if the Democrats ever do get back into the majority, that is something that I would be like top of mind for me to tackle. Because like you said, I mean, it's just so difficult for people to serve. You have to be in a certain type of, life situation. I will also mention our salary is absolutely pitiful. I only make about $13,000 a year, which
Gosh.
obviously, as nobody can do that if that they're like relying on that as their salary. And so, most people that serve either have a spouse like myself who can support me, or, have other sources of income, or they're retired, or, whatever. So there's like a certain type of person that can really do this job. And
Right.
it shouldn't be like that. And I think that, also that the schedule issues are really challenging for people. So yes, I would love to see that happen, but unfortunately that has not been
Yeah.
addressed.
Yeah. I mean, if you're gonna be paid so part-time like that with that type of salary, like the schedule needs to reflect that. And, you know,
Yeah.
people need to be able to work a full-time job if that's going to be the case. But yeah, I was gonna ask, it seems like the demographic of people that can make up the state legislature is definitely maybe like an older, wealthier type person, which is great. We obviously need representation of everyone, but that just doesn't leave much room for others to have the opportunity to represent their communities as well. So yeah, and I think that's something that we're seeing in state legislatures across the country too. We talk to a lot of people who have that same kind of situation, and it makes it really difficult to do the job and really buy in. But yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
We're still kind of operating our state as we did 50 to 100 years ago when our population, I mean, we have over 10 million people in our state now, and we have to modernize the way that we're running our legislature to reflect, the modern times, basically.
Yeah.
For sure.
I feel like there's so much of that that's like happening across the country where it's like everything needs to evolve, or like there's been big changes in one sector, but then like nothing else is keeping up with the rest of it. And so everything feels very like cumbersome when it doesn't need to and not work as well. And obviously then of course a lot of those changes go through government, ironically enough. So
yeah,
to sort of see where things, roll. But I am curious, sort of like our closing note, for those that are visiting your district, they're like, you know what, I'm making a little trip to Raleigh, like I'm gonna do it up. Where should they go? What are your recs? What is like the absolute like must-do thing for someone visiting?
Well, like I said, I'm in the suburbs of Raleigh, so I'll talk more about Raleigh because there's so much amazing things going on in Raleigh right now. I mean, we are the capital of college basketball. This last year, our NC State Wolfpack, which I'm a huge fan of, was in the Final Four. But of course, we also have Duke and UNC. So if you come to this area, you definitely have to visit, all these amazing college campuses that we have. They're all so beautiful and just offer so much great art and music and sports. And we're really, really fortunate to have all three of those universities within, 20, 30 minutes of each other. We have some amazing restaurants and obviously all those kind of things in our area. But, in my area, like I live in suburban Raleigh, like I said, in Wake County. And I mean, the one thing that I hear, like I go to different meetings and I say, oh, have you ever been to Raleigh? And they're like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. We're known as the city of oaks. And so we just have tons and tons of trees. And I think when people come here, they're just shocked about how much greenery and trees we have. So we have some fantastic parks and those kind of things in the area. And so I just love North Carolina so much because we're 2 hours from the beach and 3 hours from the mountains. And there's not a lot of other states that you can say that about. So.
Yeah. I did the whole college tour in Raleigh in high school and I loved it. I thought it was beautiful. But
oh, that's awesome.
Thank you so much for coming on. This was amazing. Can you, before we go, just plug anything in terms of where people can find you and social medias and all of that?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on social media. So hopefully y'all will follow me. I'm at Julie on all the platforms on X and Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, everything. And I hope that people will, like I said, follow along what's going on in North Carolina this year because there's a lot going on. And so it's going to be one of my missions on my social media to help people, get connected with a lot of those campaigns, that we're really focused on this year and just really educate people about, why North Carolina is so important. So just follow me on all those platforms and I look forward to interacting with you guys.
Yay. Thank you so much.